have with me today Candice Young. She's a survivor of trafficking and is now working with the nonprofit anti-trafficking organization called School Games. They hunt traffickers and provide critical intelligence to law enforcement through cyberspace operations. So thank you for joining me today, Candice. I really appreciate you getting on.
You're welcome. And I just got married, so my last name is no longer Young. It's Spangler
Oh my
now. So,
gosh. Wow, congratulations.
no, thank you.
Can you start out by telling us a little bit about your journey as a survivor of human trafficking coming into this work with School Games?
Sure. So I had been trafficked for over 25 years, so more than 2 decades. I entered into the life at 14. I exited at 36, 37. I'm 42 now, so I've been out almost 30? Yeah, I've been out almost 6 years. I've been sober for 5, so it took me like a whole nother year to get sober after I had exited out of the life. So a lot of my traffickers today are currently incarcerated, not because of anything I had to do with that or anything that they went to prison for other crimes. 25 years is a long time. That would take the whole podcast to talk about, But since I've been out 2 years after I had exited, I was just at a point in my life that the only thing I was doing was taking care of my son, who I ended up getting back custody of, taking care of my house, going to AA meetings, working with other alcoholics. I just didn't feel like I had like a purpose, and just the thought had been so daunting, like there's got to be more to life than this, right? Because I was so used to being busy for so long, you know? And a girlfriend of mine who had exited out a few years before me was like, hey, we need to organize a survivor walk. And mind you, the area of which I had been trafficked is considered south of the river where I live at today. And so I hadn't been south of the river in 2 years. So that neck of the woods, I hadn't even been near. And so there was a lot of like, I don't know, you could call it anxiety, a lot of fear, worry about going back down there to do a survivor walk. And so we ended up doing it, though. It ended up being great, just the feelings of completeness. I felt like I was taking back a lot of years that the streets had taken from me during that walk. I felt like I was representing something, not just myself, but we was also doing the walk for people who had not made it out, for people who had died out there, and for people who are still out there. And about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from an organization that I used to work with. They were a new nonprofit and they wanted me to come work with them. And so I ended up coming and working for them. About a year later, they ended up hiring me as a case manager and outreach coordinator. But in that year before they hired me, like that feeling of purpose, that feeling of like I'm actually doing something, right? Doing something that had robbed me for so long. I'm actually doing the opposite of that by helping other people who had been in the life and who were in the life, Just planting seeds basically is all I could really say that I did. There's been a couple females who have exited out of the life in the last few years that I had worked with, but that credit isn't for me. That credit is for them and God. I was just able to walk alongside them. Then during that job, I was working with them. We was doing a lot of interdiction work. And that's how I ended up meeting Skull Games. I went to my first Skull Games in Tampa, and I immediately fell in love with it. I just fell in love with the idea of, well, first off, the people are amazing that are doing it, obviously. They really have a heart for it. But other than that, I fell in love with Skull Games because for so many years, I was on the streets and I have went unidentified. People didn't know what my real name was. People didn't even care to know what my real name was. I had went by an alias. for so long that Candice was so buried far down deep, you know, but the not being identified, people driving by, just not even looking at you, you know. And Skull Games was identifying females. They were putting real names to these human beings and finding out, you know, like what had got them there, what in life had made it to where, like, this is what they're doing. Man, that's just like sticking it back to them, you know, all of my traffickers. And just not that, like, I also, like, I oftentimes get to follow it all the way through from hunting to doing advocacy work, because some of the cases that we've worked in Kansas City, when HSI or law enforcement do sting operations here, I'm often called in to, you know, advocate for the women that's coming in, that get called in, you know, supply them with services, just listen to them, talk to them, let them know that, hey, somebody's here, that if you ever want to start making the steps to get out, you know, or even while you're in, if there's something that you need, like you need help paying rent or a utility bill, like I've got resources that I can help you do that with, right? So that you don't have to go turn that other trick.
It's a heavy thing to deal with daily. You know, trafficking is a heavy thing, but I can imagine, even as a survivor, like, how do you deal with that day-to-day interaction with the trafficking world?
Well, you got to compartmentalize a lot of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and always think of what is the end game, right? Like, what are we doing this for? And as long as I keep that in the forefront of my mind, like, I feel like I can do anything, you know, like, if it's all about trying to help the women, you know, men, children, you know, had all the years that I had been out there, like, the things that are happening today, especially in the human trafficking realm, like there wasn't resources. People didn't consider it to be called trafficking. They considered it to be called prostitution, and she was doing it by choice. You know, they've made great leaps and bounds in the human trafficking realm of late, just these last few years. Like it's really amazing. Not treating the victims as criminals is a huge part, because I can remember on a number of times that when the police had kicked in a room doing a sting, just being arrested, just the way that I was treated, like no wonder nobody ever wanted to talk to you, you know, like even if I was to tell you something and it was the truth, you would still think I was lying, you know. How can you drive yourself to the hotel room? You know, that is one of the questions that often gets asked to the girls. And the truth is, honestly, is that it was the safest choice. Because if I didn't drive myself to that hotel room, like you can't tell your trafficker, no, I don't feel like making any money today. Like that's not a choice. You can't do that, right? Or else you'll get like beat or no food. And then sometimes they because there's usually a stable of girls, traffickers usually have more than one, so if I'm not complying, then they'll probably hurt my sister, you know what I mean? Which, like, I can take a beating all day, I can take the mind games all day, I can take getting talked bad to, I can do it all day, but when you start doing that to somebody I love, that will affect me.
I know that Skull Games works hand in hand with law enforcement, correct?
So what Skull Games does is we're a task force that provides statewide training and operational assistance to law enforcement and also to prosecuting attorneys on the topic of commercial sexual exploitation. We use statewide tools, we aid in identifying the victims, and we do it all with open source intelligence. OSINT is what it's called. We use it to help identify sex predators, their victims, by creating leads that will enable the law enforcement to interdict the cycle of the abuse, arrest predators, empower survivors, just help them on that healing process. We don't do any like aftercare with that's not our lane. Our lane is to help build target packages that we pass off to law enforcement.
Part of it is you gather intelligence and pass that on to law enforcement.
Basically, we work the case for them. We gather, like, everything is open source, so it's on the internet. Everything that we find, oftentimes we have to use two sources of identifying the victim, but it's just to get probable cause and reasonable suspicion so the police can act immediately. We do the case. We like give them like all the links, how we found it, photos, and oftentimes when we end up finding the POI, which is the person of interest, that's what our end game is, to identify a POI. Oftentimes there's not, and oftentimes there is, but they are it, they try to be in the background, so sometimes it's really hard to even find the POI. Oftentimes you'll find a stable before you find a POI, like other girls that's doing the the dates also.
It's shown through TV shows and movies that women who are being trafficked don't tend to have a positive interaction with law enforcement. And there's a kind of almost hostility there. And it's interesting because I read in Rebecca Bender's book how she was arrested and the police were just nasty to her and the other women. They shamed them and, cussed them out, all sorts of things that should have never happened. So, how do you, in your work as a survivor advocate, try to build that bridge between survivors and law enforcement to try and, extend understanding and wisdom to both sides?
It's all about the training, obviously. Like, law enforcement oftentimes don't have the training that they need to identify the indicators of human trafficking, right? Because 9 times out of 10, the female is addicted to some kind of substance. And so that in itself, now they're drug addicts. All of the stereotypes that go along with drug addiction, right? They're not looking for the indicators because they've not been trained on them. And so that in itself, like, they need to get all the training. And there's many organizations out here that is willing to do the training. Oftentimes when Skull Games, because we have a law enforcement officer that is with our group. So like when he goes and he's doing sting operations, like, he's training law enforcement on what to do. But like, as far as the Skull Games and what we're doing for the OSINT, we're not training on that. Like, that's not our lane, as to say, because and that's the thing about Skull Games. Like, they know what their lane is, and that's what they're sticking to. They're not trying to do everything, because you can't. Yeah, you can't do everything, right? There's not one organization out there doing everything. And so we're just staying in our lane, doing the OSINT. Whenever we're needing to do operational assistance, we'll do it then, but we just stick to the OSINT, the analytical part.
How can a person identify a potential case of trafficking online? A few years ago, it was buzzing on TikTok and social media that there was a well-known furniture store. I don't know if I would get in trouble for saying it, but I'll just leave it out, whatever. It was people were saying that they were using furniture as a cover up for selling girls online. And there was a very interesting correlation that people were pointing out that some of the examples they were pulling up of the furniture, it was labeled with a name of a girl that actually was shown to be missing. I think a lot of people were debunking it. What are your thoughts on how people can actually identify a situation where somebody is being trafficked online, because there are cases where people are being, trafficked online, like eBay, Facebook Marketplace, that kind of thing, and there is a front to it. So how can somebody identify something like that?
Well, first off, they're not trying to hide it. Like it's out in the open. Like you can order up a girl like you're ordering up a pizza. You can say what kind of hair color you want her to have, what sex acts you want her to perform. You can barter for pricing. You can do all of that. Like they're not hiding it, and so whether or not that was true or not, I don't know. Um, it's not something that I had investigated or looked into or had asked to be a part of. Working, um, but I will say that it they're not hiding it. They're not. They're not hiding it at all. Because here's the thing, it's hard to prove trafficking. Like a lot of the time, I don't want to say 9 out of 10, but a lot of the times, like these these pimps or these traffickers, they're one and the same, oftentimes get picked up on other charges, drug charges, gun charges, other things like that other than trafficking, because trafficking is it's one of the hardest crimes to prosecute. It really is, because you got victims who, the way the police treat you makes what they're saying to be true. Traffickers tell you the police ain't going to believe you. The police, like, they're going to criminalize you. You'll be the one to get in trouble, which is what has been happening this whole time, right? And so it's making what their traffickers say is true. So why would I talk to the police? You're not going to believe me anyways. And then not only that, after I talk to you, then what? What is going to help me after that? Like I'm where am I going to go? How am I going to support myself? Maybe the trafficker has her children. Maybe the trafficker has threatened them with their family. You never know what the reasoning behind why she's staying is, right? He's been taking care of her. She doesn't want for anything, like she's housed, she's clothed, she's fed, just as she's abiding by the rules. So what can you give me that's greater than that? And they don't have anything. They don't. So it's really hard for a female to start to exit if she doesn't have the right resources.
Supporting survivors in connecting them to the proper resources is really important, because it's just as important helping them to stay out as it is to get out. And a lot of people go back because they don't feel like they have any other option. They don't know much different. Even in domestic violence cases, it's easier to stay in the chaos because that's what
Yes.
that's where you're comfortable. And it's hard being out here in the world, and I can imagine the transition is so much harder, coming out of a situation where you're being trafficked and lied to for months or years, and then you don't feel like you have the proper support.
Yeah.
And then someone may just go back, and it
Yeah.
happens a lot.
On average, it takes a woman to leave a domestic violence situation an average of 7 to 8 times.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same for trafficking, because one, like they're telling you all these things, like they're in your head telling you, like, you'll never make it without him. You're Nobody will ever want you. They're telling you all these things, and then on top of that, like, you have no job skills, no job trainings, no education, because they're not sending you to school. You're not going and getting any kind of PhDs or MB. No, you're not getting any kind of education. Like, they're not doing any of that. So when you get out, you're like, shit, what am I going to do? Sorry, can I say that?
It's okay.
uh, you're like, shit, like, what am I going to do? Like, you go and you do the thing that you've been knowing what to do, you know, um,
Yes.
because it's what you know.
So I do want to get your professional opinion on something. We're seeing that pedophiles are getting really bold. and
Oh
they
yeah.
are trying their hardest to normalize their attraction to children. I don't know if you've seen it, but there was a TED talk that someone did not long ago where she was advocating for normalizing attraction to children. And they're saying that we're born this way, so you should not penalize us for this. What are your thoughts on that, being in this field and seeing these kinds of interactions with, pedophiles and traffickers? Do you believe that they're born this way? I mean, what are your thoughts on how a pedophile is made?
Honestly, I don't think you're made to be a pedophile. You know how they say marijuana is the gateway to
Hmm.
harder drugs and things like that. Well, porn definitely is the gateway to wanting to have sex with a kid. So you start out because every time you might watch a smut film or something like that and you get aroused, right?
Yeah.
And so the next time you go to try to watch that smut film, you're not getting quite as aroused. And so next thing you know, you're searching up a girl being strangled while having intercourse, right? And then that arouses you for a while. And then after that, like, that's not doing it for you anymore. And so now you want to see the girl on girl, so forth, so forth, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Like, it's even like for an alcoholic, like you might not start out being an alcoholic, but you got this chemical imbalance going on, right? And also this lack of connection. And so that is the root of the problem right there. And so instead of trying to normalize it or make it legal, you need to get to the root of the problem. Like, why is that person wanting to have sex with a kid? Like, he wasn't born that way.
Yeah.
Over time, he became that way. And so they definitely should never like legalize it. Like, we've got to keep our children safe, period. That's a very touchy subject.
Mhm.
It's because as a child, I was abused and taken advantage of. And so had that not have ever happened to me, I might not have had a screwed sense of sexuality.
Porn is so normalized these days. There are
Yes.
little kids, they say on average, people begin watching porn at about 8 years old. And I can attest to that because at 8 years old, I was exposed to pornography. And, as a kid, like I hadn't really had the birds and the bees talk. And then at the point that I did, I was still like, okay, I don't really know what you mean by that, but all right. And then kids at my school started talking about pornography. And so I was like, okay, like, what is this? So I looked at it and I was like, oh, interesting. And as a kid, like, you get these good feelings and you don't realize, like, you're a child and this is stripping you of your innocence. So
Yeah.
I kind of started on that journey of having a pornography addiction. And then when I got older, I dated a guy who was older than me. I don't even believe we should have been able to date. But then he began sexually abusing me. And I can say that because of what I had, the mentality I had acquired from starting to watch porn at a young age, I never had a positive sense of what, or a healthy sense of what sex looked like. So I can
Right.
understand how someone may go from, just watching porn to it gets more and more graphic and it's like harder
Yeah.
pornography. And then you're at a point where you're like, how did I get here? You know,
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
totally understand that.
Yeah. I've got a really good friend. His name is Neil Getzlow, and he's got a book out. It's called Unmasked, and it's from the perspective of a buyer. And he talks about his journey through addiction to porn to where he eventually started buying for sex. And so it's a really good book. Neil Getzlow, it's called Unmasked. Just throwing that out there. So I wanted to go back and answer your one question earlier about are there any clues or any signs? So oftentimes there are clues and to the abuse and the exploitation. It can be found all over the internet, especially on social media sites where your young people oftentimes are letting their guard down or trying to portray to be something more than what they are. Oftentimes, like I would say, like for the parents, if they're listening, definitely pay attention to who it is your kids are communicating with online, and just having conversations with them that if you don't know them, you don't know them. You know, there's predators out there who are portraying to be 14, 13, 15, 16-year-old boys who are grown men looking for any kind of vulnerability, right? And a vulnerability could be something as simple as, so say a girl's parents are going through a divorce. So she gets online and she goes to vent. My life sucks. Parents are getting a divorce, you know, because everybody posts everything nowadays, right? And then say a month later, you know, she starts communicating with this boy who she thinks is a boy, and a couple months later, I don't know, say she doesn't get the new iPhone, right, that just came out, and so she'll get on the internet, oh, my parents are the worst, I can't get the new iPhone, whatever, right? Well, she's been in communication with this what she assumes to be 14-year-old boy, that's her age, and he's like, I'll get you the new iPhone, girl, right? And so his hook is in, right? They've been communicating whatever they've been communicating about, but now he's willing to buy her the one thing that she wants. You know, mind you, her parents are already going through a divorce, so she's having abandonment issues, and here he is showing up for her online. You know, and now she can't get what she wants as far as material goes, and he's willing to do it for her. You know, and like her little heart is falling in love. You know, not knowing that he's a predator on the other end of that line. And so check your kid's phone, have safe conversations with these kids that if you don't know them, you don't know them. There's an organization, it's called the Stop Trafficking Project, that is doing amazing work in the schools here in the Midwest, in the schools that will allow them to come in, which surprisingly, a lot of them won't let them come in. It's age appropriate material that they're doing, um, and just doing assemblies, just educating kids on online safety. That's Stop Trafficking Project.
How would you suggest that parents teach their kids healthy and safe boundaries while they are using technology like playing video games? I know the chat rooms are dangerous as far as, you know, predators getting in contact with children and parents not being suspecting of that, or social media. How do you suggest that parents communicate healthy boundaries with their kids?
Definitely don't share like your personal information, where you live, the schools you go to, what's going on with your family. You know, I would also encourage parents to talk to their kids about finding a trusted adult. Because often, I know when I was growing up, I did not think that I could go and talk to my parents about anything at all, right? If I'd have had an adult in my life who I trusted, things might have been a little different for me, right? And so talk to your kids about finding a trusted adult, whether it's an aunt, a teacher, a counselor at school, your youth pastor, your neighbor. Find a trusted adult, so that they can be able to communicate or be able to express themselves in a healthy way. There's also an app, it's called Stop Trafficking. It's got a big red X. You can download it, it's free. It's got a lot of valuable information on it, for parents. and for teens, and for teens, for kids, um, videos and things like that on how to have them type of conversations. That's not my specialty. It's not. My specialty is advocating and hunting.
On the subject of children and technology, how predators are using that to gain access to kids, how do you see technology companies combating the use of their apps or sites to be used for trafficking? And are you even seeing that happen? Are they addressing this?
It's not anything that I've seen. Like sometimes, like they'll say the material is inappropriate, but people are on a Twitter, what is it called, X now, like blatantly just out in the open doing it. And so the answer to that, like they're really not doing anything. Um, Anytime they take down a website or stop an app or something like that, 10 more pop up in its place. So it's a uphill battle for sure.
Social media platforms are not great about,
They're not.
no, they censor the wrong things and they don't censor what needs to be censored. That's what I see.
Correct. Especially when it comes to our children.
Yeah. In the future, how do you see technology changing and evolving to combat human trafficking? And how does School Games stay on top of technology evolving?
So the technology is constantly evolving. Um, and while there's thousands of OSINT tools and techniques available out there, we at Skull Games have kind of found a few tools that are that we've been most successful with. And so when we find new tools or techniques, we always try them out, and if they work good, we'll add them to our list of things. But right now, there's not no one set tool that you can use. I do know like there are some tools that law enforcement have used that I'm not gonna mention here, that are amazing tools, but they still don't get all the work done, right? And so sometimes it takes a multitude of different input and output tools to be able to build a case. What will work for one case won't work for another, oftentimes. And it's just all about just being vigilant and looking for the indicators because they're out there.
Are there situations where you have a strong feeling and you know this person is being trafficked or this person is a trafficker, but you just don't have enough information to hand over to the police? Are there situations like that, or do you just give them what you have and hope that they can do something?
Oh no, we don't just give them anything hoping that they will do anything. We put a lot of work, a lot of investigation into these cases. Oftentimes, I get to a brick end, right? Or go down what we call rabbit holes. Oftentimes, I'll have to close that case out, put it in our Slack, and somebody else can pick it up where they got a different set of tools and can find a different lead. And so we continue to work the cases, right? It's been times that we've been working cases and then we'll find new cases, and then all of a sudden they've crossed paths. And so now we've got two different girls with the same kind of trafficker, and so then, like more intel is being put into these cases the more we work them.
Okay.
We do work new cases all the time also, but we'd never lay them to rest, and unless we've absolutely come to no POI. And this is a thing. So Skull Games, like if you're independent, you're independent. Like that's, do your thing, girl. There's more to life than that. But we're not coming after you, right? We're coming after these people who are committing the crimes, doing the force, fraud, and coercion. That's who we're going after. And not saying that we don't care about that girl, right? We do. But this is who we're going after. We're going after these pimps and these predators who are preying on our children and on these women. The group of analysts that we have and the different skill levels that is in that room from people who have been doing analytical work in the military, analytical work and like banking. Like they've got some tricks and trades to OSINT that like usually when we get a case, like it might be a few months that we're able to pass that off. And it might be locked down in a day, because it just all depends on the case and how open and how much they like are putting out on the internet. Like they're individual. It's all individual. Like they're different. They're all so different. They really are. We do have some stats on our website. You can follow us on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Snapchat, Instagram. I think we're on Snapchat, Instagram, but on our website, skullgames.io, you can find all that kind of information. We also got some new swag that just came out. So if you feel like you want to help join the fight and just don't know how, go on there and buy some swag and support Skull Games that way. Our president and founder, Jeff
Mhm.
Teagues, he just written a book also himself, Jeff Teagues. It's called Where Have All the Heroes Gone. You can get it on Amazon or on our website also. Really good read. Kind of get into the mind of how a military guy who is like all his career has hunted bad people,
Oh,
right?
Jeff is
That's what he's
awesome.
done all his life.
Well, I'll get to meet you all because I'll be at the event in April.
And oh
Yeah, I talked to
yay!
Jeff and he
And I'll
gave me
have
the
a leg up
information.
from everybody.
I'll have to
In
get
April,
merch
where
so I
people
can wear it there and represent.
better not show up without it, girl.
Okay. So, what advice would you give to survivors who want to move into the space of advocacy or even being a survivor hunter like yourself?
Absolutely, the first bit of advice that I would give them is make sure you're healed. Get your healing on. It's a lot. That life is very traumatic. There's a lot of abuse. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot that goes into being in the life. So absolutely, my first tidbit of advice would be to get healed, because if you're not healed, you're not going to help. There's not going to be no helping anywhere on any level. And then the second thing would definitely be to find an organization, research the organization, and find out what they're really doing for survivors. Make sure it's like there's survivor voices involved in it. And then Skull Games, we're always looking for new survivor to hunters that can come and join the team, because every survivor brings a different kind of perspective
Mm.
to Skull Games. We just got that lived experience
Yeah.
that analysts just don't have. They could oftentimes not understand what even a tattoo means, or I don't know, the name or the emojis that are used on these ads. Oftentimes they don't know what they mean. The language in trafficking is a different kind of language also. And just we are able to better identify, like all of the indicators.
How did the COVID-19 pandemic affect trafficking and exploitation online? I have heard from multiple sources that trafficking skyrocketed during the pandemic because of everyone being online. Just means that there's more people for predators to have access to and more predators that are online. The International Labor Organization reported a surge in online child sexual exploitation during the COVID-19 pandemic, with lockdown
Yes.
measures forcing people online and creating opportunities for traffickers to exploit vulnerabilities. So, did you
Yes.
see that on your end in Skull Games?
So I joined Skull Games right around the end of
Okay.
COVID. Um, so that is a question that I can't ask. But as far as being working in the field prior to Skull Games, It definitely did sky, like you could just it did. And just not only that, it oftentimes you're given a quota. And so if you don't make that quota, right, then things can happen. Like privileges can be taken away. So I think that like it ended up like the COVID ended up making it to where the the traffickers are seeing girls being able to make even more money, which probably did not benefit the girls, because now if you can make me this much money in this amount of time, then that's what I'm going to be expecting, right? And so I think that ultimately the lockdown hurt the victims more than anything, but it opened up the predators to be able to have more access. Just being, you're locked in your home, like nobody is seeing what you're doing in your house now, so that not vulnerability, but just that the isolation in itself is what had probably caused all of that to go up, because you're lonely. Some people are lonely in their house, and they get online, they're researching different sites, and boom, they come up on this one. And so nobody's here with me. It's not going to hurt.
Before we close, do you have any words of encouragement for a survivor or somebody who may be being trafficked, who may be listening?
Oftentimes victims don't self identify. If you do identify, just know that you're not alone, that you are loved, and that we are looking for you.